Good morning, everybody. Welcome into Group Chat Football Live. I'm Peter Ariz alongside D Money, and this is our daily show where we talk about transfer portal, recruiting, and much more across the country. College football, it's a different world these days. The transfer portal has changed the way the offseason plays out here. We're waiting for fall camp. We're waiting for fall camp. We're waiting for these workouts here. We're waiting for spring camp. We're waiting for the semifinal games here as the playoffs still have to wrap up. But offseason has already been crazy, and we continue along here on Group Chat Football Live. How you doing, D?
Doing great, man. Weather's turning cold. I mean, here in Florida, it's turning cold. It's been cold everywhere. But man, it's so fun to watch the just when you see, like, for example, a team like Georgia, right, which used to just stack player after player after player, and they would completely be in a different league than any team except for maybe an Alabama or an Ohio State. Just as recently as a couple of years ago. Now you see the backups at Georgia everywhere else, right? And you see the parity you see in the field, you understand it when you look at the portal and you see, which we talked about yesterday, Damon Wilson potentially going, Damon Wilson potentially going to Ohio State. That's how the parity happens. You see it on the field, but these little moves, big moves, these moves that you don't hear as much about, that's where it happens. And it happens now until the portal closes. And of course, after spring with the portal opening back up. So really fun to dissect it and understand why we're seeing what we see on Saturdays.
Well, a big move happened yesterday, and the top cornerback in the transfer portal is now off the market. Tacario Davis, who played his first 3 seasons at Arizona, is headed to Washington, and he's rejoining his former cornerback coach and head coach there at Washington. So you have a really unique profile on this guy, 6'4", 190, which that length and his movement ability really is kind of unprecedented at that position. So you look at what Washington's getting here, and again, for him, a decision where he has some familiarity with the coaching staff that has to go a long way here. DB coach John Richardson coached him in 2023 at Arizona. Jed Fish obviously was his head coach at Arizona, and now Washington. So one of the most highly rated guys here in the portal. PFF in 2023 had a very high grade on him. Kind of dipped a bit this season in terms of what those numbers looked like, but not too many guys walking around at this position who can bring you what Tacario Davis brings.
Yeah, it's amazing Arizona played such bad defense. When you look at some of the guys that they had on their roster, you had Tacario Davis, number 1 cornerback in the portal, according to 247 and on 3. Emmanuel Carnley on the other side, another 6'3" corner, number 6 corner in the portal, according to 247, chose Miami over Ole Miss and Michigan. Like, how did these guys struggle so much? What happened at Arizona this year that allowed guys like this to struggle? So you look at the numbers with Tacario Davis. Obviously, he's been on the NFL radar for a while just because of the size, right? Coming out of Long Beach, 6'4", 190. It's such a unique profile at corner. Of course, his other corner, Carnley, who we mentioned, 6'3", very unique profile. 2023, the guy was lights out. That's when I think the first round buzz started to pick up. 84.2 PFF grade, 42% completion rate allowed, 1 INT, 15 pass breakups, 85.9 coverage grade. Guys, those are astronomical numbers when you combine it with the physical dimensions. That is why he was projected so high. Then you go back to this year, same player, from 84 down to 61 Pro Football Focus overall grade, 54% completion percentage allowed, up from 42%. Coverage grade, again, down from 85.9. So those numbers tell the story. Same player, same team, different coach, and a much different profile in terms of production. So he's hoping go back with John Richardson, boost up that NFL stock. Very rare you see an NFL corner like this come back, right? So obviously he didn't like what he was hearing from the NFL, and he thought that, he really is a first-round player. He's the player that you saw in 23. So goes to a school in Washington that different regimes, but historically has been one of the best schools and one of the best programs as far as producing NFL defensive backs. I mean, they have about, guys like Trent McDuffie, probably the best or one of the best corners in the NFL. of course, from Washington. Plenty others over the years, going back to, Marcus Peters and before that. So this is a program that's done it at the cornerback position.
Buda Baker too, yeah.
Buda Baker, Elijah Molden. They've had a lot of guys that can play ball. Kyler Gordon from the Chicago Bears. This has been a staple of the program. Again, Jedd Fisch, new to the program. This is a player that he knows, that he's comfortable with, that he's helped develop along with John Richardson into a potential first-round pick, now hoping to recreate the magic in the Pacific Northwest. Seems like a natural move, but my big takeaway, Pete, again, to have a guy that could go to pro at corner, which is very
Premier
much a traits, premier position, a traits position, not like a go back to school kind of position, right? Usually that's an underclassman dominated position in the draft. For him to come back, that shows you the changes with the college football landscape with NIL, where someone can say, listen, I can get money, real money in college, boost my stock, and then become a first rounder when I've had a disappointing year. This is a new phenomenon that's made possible, I think, by NIL and, of course, the portal.
Yeah, and I haven't spoken to scouts directly on Tacario Davis, but with his profile, would have been drafted probably in a comfortable mid-round situation, just with his length and his movement ability right at that position, which is, we continue to say how unique it is. But so he, like you said, would have gotten drafted, but wants the opportunity to be a first-round pick, which if he regains his form and plays to a higher ability this season and puts better tape out there, quite frankly, then that could manifest itself for him. So you got to give him credit for, betting on himself and coming back here. But at the same time, I agree with you, the NIL, because he's probably getting a package similar to if he was a fourth round pick, fifth round pick. So
a great question here from Zach Lesnar is asking, our portal rankings, I mentioned Tacario Davis, number one on both major services. Are portal rankings based off high school, college production, combination of both? For example, how is Luke Kromenhoek the number 2 quarterback? Luke Kromenhoek, this is the FSU former borderline 5-star, goes to FSU for one season, shows some flashes, but not like any kind of spectacular production as a freshman, then transfers over to Mississippi State. Really a great move, I thought, by both parties. And, he's ranked as the number 2 quarterback. I think it's a bit of both, and it's an adjustment period. So last cycle, it was heavily weighted to high school rankings, heavily weighted to guys with multiple years of eligibility. And you had kind of absurd results. Like Cam Ward was like the number 4 portal quarterback, I think, ranking wise, which, the guys in New York, he's going to be the first quarterback drafted. Obviously, that was a terrible ranking, but they're adjusting. And I think still a little bit of both with a guy like Kromenhoek, who's not the number 2 quarterback in terms of what he can do for you next year, but has so many years of eligibility and physical tools. I think what they want, if I'm 247, just projecting what they on 3, I think if a guy transfers and gets drafted, they want to go back and have the right portal ranking on that draft pick. Right. So like a guy like Jaden Daniels, he was not the most productive guy at Arizona State. I mean, he had some production, but it's not like his value from an on-field perspective and production standpoint was sky high when he left Arizona State. You can say the same thing about Bo Nix, but both those guys were high school 5-stars. Then they go to their new programs and then they get drafted where they're drafted and perform where they perform. So I think if you're, one of these recruiting services, you want guys like that when you go back and look to say they are rated properly in their portal ranking, which is, again, a fusion of those two. A guy like Tacario, Davis, he was a 3-star coming out. You look at his stats, 85 ranking. He's the number 107 cornerback on the composite coming out of Long Beach, California, Millikan High School. So his high school ranking, I think, doesn't have anything to do with it. He's strictly based on what he's done in college and how he projects to the pros. But because he's so close to the pros, that I think they feel comfortable that we put a number 1 ranking on him. He has a good year at Arizona, goes to be a second first-round pick. It'll look good on them.
And look, it was obviously a big year of overture there at Washington with Jedd Fisch coming in, replacing DeBoer. Brought a lot of guys initially from Arizona with him, and now they get a big fish here in Tacario Davis. I expect that program to continue moving forward here. They do very well with the talent acquisition side of things, and Jedd Fisch can coach.
Absolutely. that's a program that, when I was growing up, it was a power. It's sort of been up and down the last couple decades, but, Chris Peterson did, and then what Kalen DeBoer did, it's here to stay. Jed Fish, I thought, overperformed a little bit given what he lost. They basically had a whole new team at Washington. Plus, he's playing in the Big Ten, an incredibly difficult conference, maybe the best conference in college football right now, if we're being honest. So for him to at least stay above water at Washington his first year, I thought was a tremendous success. Kind of what it's amazing. Washington and Michigan, right? These were the two best teams in the country last year. And then they go back and have, seasons where you look on paper, you say mediocre, but to me, those were successful seasons given what they lost, what they're going against, and their ability to, basically hold competitiveness and then build to the future. I feel good about where both programs are. I agree, Zach. Washington's going to take a major leap next year with their young quarterback.
Another program that just added a quarterback, and he's not young. He's one of the most experienced that there is out there in college football, and one of the all-time winningest at the FCS level, and that's quarterback Mark Gronowski, as he is on his way to Iowa. And this is a really interesting fit here, as there was some speculation initially when his head coach from San Diego State, from South Dakota State, SDSU,
the Jackrabbits.
The Jackrabbits. When he went over to Washington State, that he would follow him to Washington State. Zevi Eckhouse stays with the Cougars. So that leaves Gronowski here to make a decision, visits Iowa, commits here a couple days later. Iowa, talk about a consistent program over the years with Kirk Ferentz, 2 10-win seasons out of the last 4 years here. So the issue, though, has always been the offensive side of the ball. It has not been very explosive. Haven't been able to move the ball downfield with much consistency the last few years. There was a bit of improvement this season from 2-3 years ago. That was, memed everywhere. But Gronowski is going to bring really a sense of, to me, obviously a guy who wins games, but can move those chains for you.
Yeah, and look, so much of what we talk about here on this show when it comes to the portal is fit, and I absolutely love this fit. Let's start with Iowa as a program. Probably, when you really look at the numbers, besides like an Alabama and an Ohio State, who's producing more pros, more impactful pros than the Iowa Hawkeyes, man? You talk about offensive line, tight end, those two. But what about defensive line? What about linebacker, right? What about defensive back in recent years? The guys like Stone, DeJean, Moss. These are NFL starting players, in some cases Pro Bowl type players. So Iowa is a NFL factory. Of course, a lot of people from there starting at the top from an NFL background. But the quarterback, even though you've had pro style quarterbacks, you haven't had a ton of really legitimate pro quarterbacks at Iowa. So you bring in a Gronowski, and not only is he you just listen to his quotes about choosing Iowa. He says, look, the culture at Iowa reminds me a lot of the classic Midwest culture I grew up in. Gronowski grew up in the Chicago area. Family atmosphere, coaches are welcoming, similar situation where I've been. So that's the kind of intangible part. But then you say, why the football reason? He is going there because the new offensive coordinator, Coach Lester, analyst at Green Bay last year, teammate of Matt LaFleur from Western Michigan, bringing that Shanahan-style offense that you see all over the NFL. Now he could say, I'll be developed like a pro at Iowa at the quarterback position. Of course, he's surrounded by pros and is generally in a pro system. So I think that little tweak to it is going to make a lot of difference recruiting quarterbacks like Gronowski, because you've always sold yourself as an NFL factory. Now you can add the quarterback position to that, especially if Gronowski ends up being a pro. He had draftable grades going in. And, Pete, you know the accolades. You can go and run through some of them. This is a highly accomplished and experienced quarterback.
Yeah, look, this is 49 wins as a starter, 49-6, threw for more than 10,000 yards. Like I said, he's tied for the all-time FCS record, back-to-back national titles, top offensive player in the FCS in 2023, winning the Walter Payton Award. And I was going to bring this up. I was a bit kind of surprised. I'm not saying that there wasn't more interest, but we didn't hear about more interest publicly. Is Zach Lesnar asking if Miami was interested in him or not, as Miami's a program that needs a quarterback still, or is in the market for a portal quarterback. And from what we understand, Miami was not involved there. But it seemed like, again, like I said at the beginning of this segment, Washington State rumors early because of his coach at Ty there. And then the Iowa visit happens and he commits there. And that was pretty much all that we heard credibly. So I was a bit surprised the guy with that resume didn't have more suitors.
Right. But at the end of I agree. Because I think
North Carolina needs a quarterback.
Yeah, I think this guy's as good as pretty much anybody that's been in the portal over here. It ended up being the right fit, and of course he's playing big time football in the Big Ten, which probably is the best conference right now in college football. But look at the profile. So 49-6. I mean, come on, I don't care what division you're in. 49-6, more than 10,000 yards. When you look at quarterbacks, whether it's pro or college, we say this on every show: reps, experience, starts. That is what's been the difference maker at the college level, whether it's Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, or at the pro level with Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. So that's a huge factor in the modern game. Gronowski has those starts. I don't care if it's not the FBS level. These are starts against real good teams with crowds and a lot of pressure.
He's a big physical quarterback as well. So look, the speed of the game is always going to be something that is an adjustment for these guys who come from the FCS level. But I think he's got half of it down with his physical ability.
Yeah, 6'3", 225, big hands, athletic. We talked about him as a runner. And then the arm strength is there. He's got a little bit of unusual release, but he can drive the ball. This is a guy with draftable grades. We talked to NFL sources. If he would have come out this year, he probably would have gotten drafted, assuming the post-draft process was smooth. So NFL talent, physical, ton of experience, and he's going into a system that fits. Talk about the Shanahan system, all the bootlegs, all that outside running, all the stretch plays, the outside zone, and then the design quarterback movement off that. That's going to take advantage of his athleticism while still developing him as a thrower. And if you need him to run inside, he has that ability. He did that at South Dakota State, and it's in him. The comp I have for him is Will Howard at Ohio State. Big guy, tough guy, good arm, can run, can lead, can run your offense. That to me is where he fits. And of course, Will Howard might win a national championship this year, right? So you can do really, really well with a quarterback like that. I think his physicality and arm strength will play well in those Big Ten conditions, which can be harsh. So I really love this fit. This guy's a national champion 2 times. He's the player of the year in the FCS. He's done everything he can do at the FCS level. Now is a chance to compete in the Big Ten. Maybe he could be that Iowa quarterback that finally gets him over the hump. You look at the offense and the trajectory. This was an offense that was 129th in scoring offense in 2023, 15.4 points per game, averaged 27.7 points per game this year under Tim Lester. So they're moving up in the world. They're still not where they want to be. Quarterback like this can really make a difference.
Yeah, I like it. The ceiling is the floor is always pretty high at Iowa, and I think he raises what it could be for them next season.
Yep.
All right, so talking about a quarterback who's been around for a while in Mark Gronowski, and switching gears here to someone for the future, and that is the top recruit at the quarterback position for the next recruiting class here, 2026, Jared Curtis. As he was a former Georgia commit, but his recruitment is starting to heat up here a bit. And a lot of times with these high-profile quarterbacks, they tend to get their decisions out of the way earlier rather than later. The class gets built around them. They try to recruit other guys to come with them. So I think coaches are sensing that, and it's a who's who in terms of who's involved with this recruitment here as I pull up this graphic. And this report that we're referencing here is from Steve Wiltfong at On3, and you see it here in the graphic. Some of the programs that are involved here, basically a lot of the big boys. And I'm going to pull up his huddle here. You can see why that's the case. Big guy and doing a lot of things that we look for in the modern quarterback, being able to play, off balance and outside of the pocket. making throws that aren't necessarily with everything perfect in front of him. So this guy is a really special one.
Yeah, before we get into the players, just on the recruiting side. So Mike Shula, new offensive coordinator at South Carolina, he visited with the family and Curtis on Tuesday. This is Wednesday today. Hugh Freeze from Auburn is going in home. Mike Bobo from Georgia, where Curtis was previously committed and is still interested in. They're coming to see him on Thursday. You got Alabama and Oregon next week. Ohio State and Ole Miss are also involved. He plans to visit all of these schools on campus during the spring and summer period before he makes a decision before his senior year. He'll be back in Georgia. Even though he decommitted from Georgia, he's going to visit Alabama for Junior Day the weekend of February 1st. Georgia, January 18th, he's scheduled to be there. And if you listen to On 3 and some of the people around the recruiting industry, Oregon's a team with a lot of juice, right? They just lost one of their two big-time recruits that was a quarterback commit in this previous class to Cal, ended up transferring Sagapolatelli. You still have Achilles Smith Jr. there, Dante Moore, projected starter going forward, but you have one less guy in the room. Of course, you're Curtis. You're not really worried too much about competition because you got a lot of faith in your ability. But man, the player now, as you see this huddle, he really reminds me. You see how he palms the ball. He's just
Josh Allen.
100% Josh Allen. The physicality, the casualness, but the ability to make plays. He can just kind of wait because he knows he has the arm strength.
See that no look? Look at this. I mean, he's sick.
And look,
it's the next play here.
Yeah, it's casual, and I always say casual in a negative way. Cam Ward was the best quarterback in college football this year, being very casual. There he is. It's just he knows that because of his size and athleticism, he could just kind of palm the ball and hang out, break a tackle like he does there, and make a play. Look at that, and he's got the arm angles. I mean, very athletic. He was actually a running back earlier in his high school career, so you can see some of that athleticism. Look at his stats this year: 2024 Gatorade Player of the Year in Tennessee. Led the Eagles to a 13-1 record and a state title. He had 2,672 yards and 38 touchdowns, ran for 577 yards and an additional 14 scores. At times, he's had trouble just kind of a completion percentage standpoint, accuracy standpoint. Again, reminds you of Josh Allen in that regard. But the natural throwing talent is obvious. And I think, this quarterback class, as you dig into it, I don't know if on paper it's as talented as what you had the year before, the class that just signed, which in my opinion, and we'll probably do a video on this soon, that 2025 quarterback class, I think is probably the best I've seen coming out of high school. And as I've been following recruiting for 20 years, this next class 26, not as deep, but a guy like Curtis, he's a 5-star to me in any class just because of what you're seeing right there, the physical ability.
Yeah. And this tweet that I'm showing here is a video that was tweeted out, and then Roddy Nabulsi, who's a Georgia reporter, has been around for a while, said I drove 7 hours this spring to watch Georgia commit Jared Curtis work out at a camp. Best QB that I have seen in years at his age, and Roddy's been around for a while.
Yeah, appreciate you, Michael. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, this guy is I'm a big believer in that, and this is where I maybe differ from others. I don't like taking high school kids that are high floor, right? Because you can get the floor in the portal. You can get the floor like a good, solid quarterback game manager in the portal. And those guys have experience, which is what you really want. To me, in high school, if you're getting high school recruiting and you're fighting with a guy like Curtis, he's going to command major, major money. You're not going to get a player like this on the cheap. You got to devote a lot of resources to a player like this. So if I'm devoting a lot of resources to a high school quarterback, I want to get a guy that, if you look at the tool set, you say, man, if this comes together, he's the first pick of the draft. He's a top 10 pick. And I think Curtis, physically, when you watch this guy, if it comes together for him, compared to like a guy like Julian Sain. Julian Sain was a 5-star a couple years ago for Ohio State, and he projects as just a really good college quarterback. Maybe he develops into a pro, but he's, smart, accurate, sees the field really well. But he's not physically spectacular. This dude right here, to me, is what a 5-star quarterback should look like because of the physical tools. Again, just going through some of the college speed, and we talked about the fit. South Carolina with Lenore Sellers. He fits the mold. Former running back, like we said, big, athletic. You can see how that's a developmental fit for him. Obviously, Georgia, he already committed there. They need a big-time quarterback. They're lacking that. Gunnar Stockton maybe is their quarterback of the future, but you don't see huge physical projection on him. Auburn, I don't know about that fit with Deuce Knight. You got him already there, although, of course, you're going to recruit a top quarterback every year. Ohio State can use a young quarterback. They did sign Tavian St. Clair last year, who's another physically talented guy, number 2 in the country. Ole Miss, they're going to move forward with Austin Simmons. But, all these teams could use a player like this, but a lot of them have young quarterbacks that can go.
You mentioned South Carolina with Lenora Sellers. Don't forget Aaron Nolan in that room too.
100%. And I think this guy, to me, physically different planet. But again, Oregon has a lot of juice right now in recruiting in general. And with Curtis, I can see the fit. They got a lot of guys in the room with talent now. Dante Moore, Akili Smith, both big physical, talented guys like him. But, he's probably not worried about competition. If you're landing, you're going full bore to get this guy because you don't know who your future is. You think it's Dante Moore, but you don't really know.
Canes Cats Heat 305 says he told Josh Newberg last month that he wanted to visit Miami since Cam Ward is his favorite player. So I don't know, maybe Miami gets in the mix there.
Yeah, you better talk to this guy because this guy is elite. If you're a school on his list, you're feeling pretty good because he is that guy. I've watched most of the quarterbacks that are blue chippers in 26, seen games on some of them, not all of them. This guy to me is head and shoulders above from what I've seen from an upside perspective.
We were just talking about South Carolina being in the mix there and that they have a nice future in that quarterback room. But they picked up a really good one in the backfield yesterday as former Utah State running back Rasul Faison is headed to play for the Gamecocks. And this is a guy who had some big-time interest, had also visited Alabama and Florida State, had a big year for Utah State last year, has a crazy path to get to where he is today, as he was at Lackawanna Junior College, was at Marshall, Snow College, then at Utah State, had over 1,000 yards last year, 5.6 yards a carry, and big games against good opponents, Utah, USC, and Boise State, averaged 5.1 yards a carry on 54 carries and scored a couple touchdowns. So this is a guy who looks the part. I mean, you see physically he's strong and he runs with authority. So I think you always try to project guys, and it's tough when they're taking a jump up in competition from where he was to the SEC. But I think he's built for it.
Yeah, 5'11", 200. He looks that on film. You mentioned the performance against Utah, USC, Boise State. Looked the part there. Spoke to a source who was at Utah State, been around big-time football, and he loves this kid. Says he's a slasher, good top-end speed, long strider, great in the open field. Won't look out of place physically in the SEC. And he said, look, he can play in the SEC, no problem. Was very quick to say that. And this is someone, again, he was around him at Utah State, but he's familiar with a big-time college football. Look at the player. He's originally from Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, number 4 running back in the portal. Also visited Alabama, FSU, North Carolina. So 3 big NIL schools there. South Carolina ends up getting the win. And, South Carolina, the team's going to get a lot of preseason buzz because of what Lenora Sellers has done, because you have Dylan Stewart, potentially the best defensive player in the country next year. So the team is on the up and up. But when you look at the running back room, I don't think it's, there's a solid starter there on paper. You look at Oscar Attaway, who's the leading returning rusher, 295 yards, not a ton, and only 3.8 yards per carry, which South Carolina, with the goals they have, they're going to want more from that room. It could come from Attaway. That doesn't mean that 3.8 yards is what he is, but you need to get that number up. You need to be more explosive to be a key part of this offense if your goals are what they are. You have Jawarren Howell, Matthew Fuller returning, but again, no one that's really done it yet. So a guy like Faison, he can come right in and compete for the job. Doesn't matter if he's coming from Utah State. I think he's going to get a chance. When you look at the production he had last year as a 1,000-yard back, you look at the physical tools, you look at the performance in big games. He's gonna take a shot. And if you're the running back with Lenora Sellers at quarterback, you're feeling pretty good because teams are going to be so focused on what he can do. It opens you up as well.
Good patience, man, on some of those runs from the angle from behind from behind center. Michael Sears, man, appreciate the support. Guys, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel here as we keep it moving here on Group Chat Live, Group Chat Football Live. But big get here for South Carolina as they continue to add to the talent on the offensive side of the ball there.
No question. And look, if you're going to get a guy, if you're an SEC school and you're going to G5 to get somebody, you want production and you want traits, right? This guy's got production at that level and he's got some traits. I don't see superstar track speed or anything like that, but the guy can run. He's big. He's fluid. It makes sense. Now get him in camp. We'll see in spring what he can do.
South Carolina, not the only program that bolstered their offensive side of the ball. I don't think anyone did so more than this next program we're going to talk about, and that's Oregon, as they pick up the top running back available here in the portal, Mekhi Hughes, coming over from Tulane, and then they bring one of their own back in Evan Stewart at wide receiver. There was a lot of talk about him potentially heading to the next level and declaring for the draft, but Dan Lanning gets him back. Dante Moore expected to be the guy there at quarterback next season. They also just added Malik Benson at wide receiver, who played at Florida State last year. We have a video on that. So Oregon fans, if you're checking this video out, we did something on that Malik Benson pickup the other day. But we'll start with Evan Stewart, who former 5-star, started his career at Texas A&M and was a big part of their offense this season.
Yeah, we did that video on Malik Benson yesterday, and we were saying, look, Malik Benson is going to help them as a deep threat. He's going to help push those safeties back, but he's not going to be your number one receiver based on what he's done to this point in his career, and we've seen him along the journey. Just that's not his game. He's deep threat, and when you put him in that role, that's when he's going to be most successful. So if you're Oregon, losing Tez Johnson and potentially at that time losing Evan Stewart, you're wondering who's going to fill in the void here. You have Tacario Moore, who I think is going to be an instant impact Ryan Williams type player as a true freshman. Jamar Chase was actually my comparison for how he plays the game. Big, physical, strong body guy with elite explosiveness as well. Very tough to tackle in the lower body. That's the Jamar Chase. He's not as big, maybe a little faster top end. That's who he kind of reminds me of, Tacario Moore. So I expect instant impact there, but that's a true freshman. Oregon's got the goals of winning a national championship. Obviously disappointed this year. They came up short. So if you have those big goals, you need to load up at this wide receiver position. Malik Benson helps with the deep threat. Tacario Moore, very promising. But getting Evan Stewart back, you not only get somebody with a lot of production and experience, you get somebody with still untapped upside. Injured down the stretch here. I think that Oregon really missed his productivity in the passing game. That was it was touch and go, and then you find out he's not going to play. And it really, to me, took the wind out of Oregon's sails in many respects. But you look at his production this year, 613 yards, 12.8 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns, 48 catches. I mean, solid. But those numbers can go up without Tez Johnson. I think you could see this guy as a potential 1,000-yard receiver. And you look at some of the traits, a former 5-star from Frisco, Texas, Dallas area, and the track accolades are just incredible. Won the Texas 5A long jump title as a junior, 24 and foot 6.5 inch jump. Also won the silver in the triple. Look at the 100 meters, 10.5, 800, 21.38, 200, 21.08, 200 as a sophomore. So elite explosiveness. And look, Oregon fans know what he can do. They've watched him this year, but I think there's still more to him now in year 2 of the system that you could see. And hopefully he has that connection with Dante Moore, whoever Oregon's new quarterback is. But I really think Evan Stewart's somebody that we've been waiting for that breakthrough. And now with all the attention on him and a great program around him, you might finally see it here in 2025.
And then the other move for Oregon that happened was Mekhi Hughes, a guy we've spoken about multiple times here on Group Chat Football. The top returning back in the country. I mean, he has the claim to it statistically. He was the 9th leading rusher in the country last season, and all 8 running backs ahead of him are entering the NFL draft. So, like I said, he can stake that claim without much argument there, at least statistically. So that sort of returning production, and Hughes is still going to have actually a couple years of eligibility, but one of the most again, productive backs in the country, 5'10", 210 pounds, almost 3,000 yards and 24 touchdowns in 2 seasons with Tulane. And we spoke about it when we did a video on him before, but his half-brother, Naeem Offord, a 5-star who flipped from Ohio State to Oregon on signing day. So maybe something that's been kind of working here for a few weeks.
Yeah, that might have been a 2-for-1 deal when you got offered, because if he goes to Ohio State needed a running back too now. They ended up getting C.J. Donaldson out of West Virginia in the portal, but they could have easily been in this Mekhi Hughes sweepstakes. So you get two players, effectively, two really impactful players with one recruiting win. 5'11", 210 pounds, redshirt sophomore, was recovering from an injury his freshman year, which is why he redshirted, originally from Birmingham, Alabama. And he's one of the most productive backs, like you mentioned, Pete, if not the most productive returning back in college football. When you watch him play for Tulane, it's not like a super physical, super fast back. He's just rock solid, knows how to run. Great vision, great patience, always keeping his shoulders square to the end zone, good balance, has some elusiveness as well. But it's not like, again, he's not one of these backs where there's just one skill that just electrifies you. It's just a solid package. He knows how to run. He knows how to get yards. He's been very consistent once he's been on the field. Of course, he had the redshirt year recovering, but then back-to-back seasons well over 1,000 yards, been consistently in that 5-yard per carry range. Of course, the competition at the G5 level at Tulane, not what he's going to be seeing in the Big Ten. But, he's been there. Running is running. He knows how to run. He's going to have better offensive line as well. We talked about the passing game with Evan Stewart coming back. If you can get that passing game to not miss a beat with Dante Moore, then you also have, we mentioned Malik Benson, what he brings, the ability to back those safeties up a little bit. Now Mekhi Hughes has more opportunities. People, what would I do without you correcting me every time I flub one of these names?
Listen, I don't like to do it, but it's a necessary evil.
I flub my kids' names. Hopefully they don't hold it against me when they get older. But Mekhi Hughes, very rock solid back. I think he is going to potentially represent an upgrade in Oregon's running game this year, even though, again, you've had pro backs the past 2 years. I think just from a college productivity standpoint, Hughes might have the best season of all these guys next season.
Good question here from Canes Cat C305 asking, is this running back Mekhi Hughes better than Damian Martinez coming out of the portal last year? And it's a valid question because they were both the number one backs coming out. Just looking at the numbers, Hughes has more yards in his 2 years at Tulane than Damian Martinez did. He had about 700 more yards, but he had about 60 carries a season more than Martinez, and the average yard per carry was about a yard less. He had 5.3. Martinez was averaging 6.1 in his 2 years at Oregon State. And the size difference, I mean, listen, Hughes is not a small back. He's 5'11", 210. But Martinez, you're getting 6'1", 230. And I think it's a different element. Both tremendous backs. And I think both rightfully rated as the number one backs in the portal.
Yeah, like different running styles, like you mentioned. With Martinez, much more physical. He wants contact. I think his top end speed is probably similar, maybe even better. Mekhi is much more of, he's elusive, but it's not like a Reggie Bush where he's putting guys in highlight reels. He's avoiding contact. He's being efficient in his movement, and he's able to find the hole and use tremendous vision. Tulane had very much a run-based offense. It was all built around Hughes. Even though, Mensa, the quarterback, Darren Mensa, goes to Duke and gets a record-breaking at the time NIL deal to play quarterback for Duke. But really, this offense was built around Hughes. It was a running offense at Tulane, and he was productive. So different backs, but I think both guys can do what they do.
Yeah, Justice Haynes, as Canes Cat C305 says, he preferred him as number one back, and he was off the board quickly, went to Michigan. So yeah, that's definitely a debate there between those two.
And we'll see. I mean, look, we'll see who's Big Ten, all Big Ten first team. Those guys can compete, right, to be all Big Ten first team, because they're both going to be in the conference. So maybe they both are all Big Ten first team. We'll see how it all shakes out.
Appreciate the 50 plus on with us right now on Group Chat Football Live. Guys, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We hit 900 this morning, so let's get to 1,000. You guys have been awesome in helping us continue to grow this page, and we're going live every day here talking portal, recruiting, and springtime is always, it's a lot of action recruiting-wise, a lot of offers going out, a lot of guys that we haven't heard of flying up the rankings, so excited to track all of that stuff. Has been a lot of portal talk here, but as the portal will officially close here, as enrollment closes in the first week of after January here in a couple weeks, then will really get into recruiting heavily. But a big flip in terms of the portal that happened yesterday as safety Adrian Maddox, he was going to Florida, but now he is on his way to Georgia. And this is a guy who has played at multiple other programs. Alabama State started his career there in Montgomery, a place I'm very familiar with. Temple, UAB back there in the state of Alabama. And now headed to the big show at Georgia and the SEC. This is a big safety with some speed, 6'3", 200 pounds, originally from Conyers, Georgia, and had a big year last year for UAB with 44 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 7 pass breakups, 2 forced fumbles, and a pick 6 that was a 99-yard pick 6 against Rice. So you're getting a guy who's played a lot of football, seems to have the physical traits here, and was wanted by multiple SEC schools as he makes the switch from Florida to Georgia.
Yeah, this is a huge win, in my view, for the Georgia Bulldogs. 6'3", 200 from Conyers, Georgia, Atlanta area. Watching him just film-wise, he plays really, really fast. I mean, he sees what he sees, and then he attacks. He can strike. He throws around his body. He has nice twitch to him for a longer guy. He can pick up speed in a hurry. And, you know, he's bounced around a little bit. Obviously, this is his first tenure at the highest levels, at the Power 4 level. I think about the Florida-Georgia battle here. Of course, 2 classic rivals. Both of them really prioritize Zechariah Poyser, the Jacksonville State safety, number 2 safety in the portal, who ended up going to Miami. And they both really battled for Poyser. They both had him in for visits. He's a similar kind of player to Maddox as far as being that sort of, you know, free safety with some length that can also strike and has explosiveness to him. So they lose that. Georgia takes Jaden Harris from Miami as a safety. And, you know, Jaden Harris did not have a great season last year. Travaris Robinson, the coach of the safeties coach for the Georgia Bulldogs, recruited Jaden Harris out of high school. We did a video on him yesterday. They obviously felt that he could contribute either in special teams or just maybe a different role or different utilization than he had in Miami, where he struggled this past year. But Harris alone is not going to replace a Malachi Starks by any means. Now, you have KJ Bolden, probably the best returning safety along with Caleb Downs in the country, but this is Georgia. You need more. So someone like this, I think, gets you much closer to your standard than a Jaden Harris. And if Jaden Harris is able to turn around, he's going to help you. But this guy right here is a starting caliber player that you take from a team you're competing with. Florida has been down for several years, but they're going to get a lot of hype this year. A lot of people might put him above Georgia, believe it or not, in these preseason rankings when you see a DJ Lagway and some of the returning guys they have. So this win for Georgia in recruiting is almost like a classic Florida-Georgia win, as opposed to the past few years where Georgia's been on the absolute top and Florida's been struggling. I know those programs are much closer today than they have been in many, many years. So a win like this is double meaningful.
Yeah, and he's the 5th player now that Georgia's added in the portal. The Branch brothers, him, Noah Thomas at wide receiver as well, that we speculated yesterday was on its way to happening, and that was a big addition for their receiver room as well. But defensively, they seem to need a lot of help on that side as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is Georgia. They're built on defense, and we talked about it earlier in the show, but part of the problem for Georgia, when they dominated look, they're still a top program, obviously, but when they were truly dominant the past few years, you were able to stack 5-star after 5-star after 5-star and let them sit on the bench. When it's their turn, they're ready to go. Now with the portal becoming what it is, NIL becoming what it is, teams are rating Georgia for their depth, right? We just saw Wilson, the defensive end, enter the portal, likely on his way to Ohio State, who is really in a position to start and make an impact for Georgia as they lose their 2 first-round edge rushers. So that kind of thing is depleting Georgia's depth and ability to just roll out talent. So they're coming closer to earth. They got to be smart. They got to hit on evals, and they themselves have to go in the portal and get guys and otherwise would have come from their recruiting class. So they're getting with the times, and I think this is a player that if you're Florida, you didn't have great defensive backs last year, and this is a position you identified as a major need. Your safety position was a struggle probably for the past few years. So I think this is not only a big win for Georgia, but a big loss for Florida after you've lost on Zechariah Poyser. I'm very curious to see who they target next to safety, because that is a critical need, I think, for the Gators going forward.
Well, one of the most fascinating programs to follow in the portal here has been North Carolina, obviously with Bill Belichick taking charge over there. And they picked up a very interesting one as Bryce Yates transfers over from UConn. And this is a funny one because he was the MVP in the bowl game versus the Tar Heels. And he had initially entered the portal on the 13th of December, withdraws from the portal, plays in the bowl game, and then a couple days after the bowl game, re-enters the portal, and now is on his way to North Carolina. And defensive line has been one of the main focuses here for Bill Belichick and his staff, as they lost 4 starters on the D-line. And they've added a few guys there, but honestly, to me, Yates looks like maybe the best one they've added in terms of his production. 6'4", 265, 12 and a half sacks in his career, 30 tackles for loss. So, I mean, I like this pickup for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, you mentioned, Melkart Abu-Joyde. I'm sure I butchered that, from Delaware. Sort of a late blooming rising player. Also has some good tools. CJ Mims, East Carolina, more of a rotational guy. We talked about them in prior videos. When you talk about Bill Belichick and this particular portal class, 13 guys, I think the first thing that jumps out is not a lot of highly touted transfers, right? You talk about 13 commits, only one considered a 4-star portal commit. Now, we remember Bill Belichick in the pros. He was notorious for making draft picks that people didn't, have necessarily high grades on themselves. He wasn't taking the Mel Kiper #1 player at the position ever, right? Every time the New England came on the clock, he prepared for anything because they could take these guys kind of off the grid. So you see that continue here with North Carolina in the portal. Body types, we've done videos on pretty much all of North Carolina's commits. You can go see them in the archives if you haven't watched and you're a North Carolina fan or interested. But they've been getting guys with great physical dimensions, height and weight. Bryce Yates, 6'4", 265 pounds, originally from San Antonio, Texas, underrated guy. He has the body type, and of course they saw it up close when he dominated North Carolina in that bowl game. Another thing that jumps out from just big picture with North Carolina, Jim Mora, who NFL background himself, Coach Yates, had him ready for an NFL system. That's good for Yates' transition, but also what jumps to mind is Mora's been complaining about tampering publicly on Twitter to the media. He's saying people are tampering with my players. We had a very good season. Now people are trying to get our guys. I'm not accusing anybody of tampering, but I wonder if there's a backstory here, given the fact that this guy is kind of flirted with the portal a little bit before ultimately entering for good.
Well, he's not the only one. Gavin Gibson transferred from East Carolina, a defensive back, and East Carolina's coach also is complaining about tampering. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting situation. Do Moore and Belichick have history from the NFL? We'll see how that whole thing plays out. But again, you go to Yates. I think it's really very much about what Belichick liked at New England. When we talk about the defensive line, how many undersized defensive linemen did you see in New England? Very few. You would have outside linebackers who, like your Mike Vrabels, who were big outside linebackers that could rush the passer a little bit. Willie McGinnis, really big outside linebacker. But in terms of defensive line, hand in the dirt, these were big dudes, usually over 6'4", usually over 265 pounds. And I think that's what you see with Yates. He's just a big body defensive end with some twitch, who is going to increase your overall size profile along with the rest of this North Carolina transfer class.
And we actually have a question here from Brandon Lee, who looks like he's a Nebraska fan. Appreciate your support. Asking, do you guys think the Huskers can land both Elijah Pritchett and Shiaz Pete? I don't know how you pronounce the name, but Pete, the offensive tackle from New Mexico State, who's supposed to be visiting them later this week. And we did a video on Pritchett yesterday, if you haven't checked that out. And the predictions were that he was headed to Nebraska. I know before the show, D, you and I were saying that LSU is still involved there. So to land both of them, I don't know if Pete was maybe kind of a backup plan to that situation. Obviously, they want all the offensive linemen that they can get to protect Raiola, but and they haven't added any other offensive linemen here in the portal. So I don't see why that would be off the table. But LSU lurking there.
Yeah, you say exactly what I was going to say, which is they need offensive alignment to protect their biggest asset. It's somewhere where you want to invest your money if you're Matt Rule, and you haven't added anybody. So to me, I don't see why. So much about portals prioritization, right? How much money are you going to allocate to a particular player? It's not so much about whining and dining like it is in high school, although high school is changing as well. But it's very much about, is this our guy that we're going to go all in with money wise? Because we need this position. It's a system fit. And I think for Nebraska, both of these guys make sense for Nebraska. LSU has added offensive linemen. You look at Josh Thompson from Northwestern. You look at Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech. But more on the interior, they're losing both their offensive tackles to the NFL. Of course, they've recruited at a higher level than Nebraska. They have guys in-house. But that'll be an interesting battle because if you're LSU, you're saying, hey, we got two guys going to the pros. Come right in, and you'll step in and be the next guy for an Elijah Pritchett. So that's something to watch. But I think if I'm Nebraska, I am not letting these guys go anywhere else because you just absolutely need to. Your whole program right now is that it depends on Dylan Raiola being a success. You invested him financially. He's the face of your program. He's the type of player you have not gotten to Nebraska in the last 30 years. So you really need to make sure he is successful. You've added a lot of receivers, Dane Key, Harley Gilmore, Haziah from California. So you got to make sure that he is protected and able to distribute to these playmakers. And I think both these guys are high priorities for Nebraska.
So we got a comment here from Sergeant Moorhew says, let's go UNLV. And that's actually the program that we're going to be talking about next here on Group Chat Football Live, as they've been making a lot of moves here with Dan Mullen. We spoke about them yesterday, adding Jake Pope, the safety from Georgia, and they've made another addition here in the secondary. Another former SEC guy, as he started his career at LSU, guy from Lafayette, Louisiana, was the number 12 player in the state of Louisiana coming out of high school in 2022 and played last year as the third cornerback for Arizona State. LaTerrence Welsh is headed to Las Vegas to play for the UNLV Rebels. This is a guy with some length, 6'1", 195. Played a lot last year for Arizona State. Tough incident, though, as he, after their not a bowl win, but their rivalry game win against Arizona, stole a teammate's watch and went to go pawn it off, was arrested. Shortly thereafter, the watch was valued at $30,000. So, and it was a teammate's watch. So I think that he was immediately kicked off the team there. Arizona State didn't have him for the rest of the year, and that was December 2nd. So they didn't have him for their Big 12 championship game, and then they did not have them for the playoffs either. And he was their number 3 corner. But UNLV taking a chance on a guy here, again, third school for him, former big recruit. You have to think that the conversation between him and Dan Mullen was, look, this is your last real opportunity here, and you can't mess it up.
Yeah, it's first of all, my big takeaway is $30,000 for a college kid's watch. I mean, times have changed. I've never seen a $30,000 watch. Maybe I have, I didn't notice. But defensive tackles and corners to me are kind of similar in that it's a traits position, right? And those traits typically go to the Southeastern Conference, right? You talk about corners and defensive tackles. Those are the highly rated guys that go to those conferences because, there's not that many corners that are over 6'1" with that kind of athleticism. There's not that many defensive tackles that are over 300 pounds with a certain level of athleticism. So those guys not only go to the SEC typically, at least to start, but they get a lot of chances because those physical traits are so hard to get. You look at Dan Mullen, he's from the SEC, of course, Mississippi State, then Florida. He's been around this kind of thing, right? This is not a new thing for him. I am sure, as much as it is unusual to us listening to it. So he's been around this, and I think he's comfortable with it. I'm sure he's done his homework. And you look at what he's done in the portal. You got, of course, Mullen has the experience at Florida, both as an offensive coordinator and then later the head coach, and then in the SEC in general with Florida, Mississippi State. So what does he do? He goes to what he's familiar with. Start with 2 Power 4 guys that are originally from the state of Florida, in Calandria, the quarterback, and Glover, the running back from Utah. Calandria originally from University of Virginia. So 2 Florida guys, Glover, I believe, from Lakeland, Calandria from the St. Pete area, Tampa Bay, that whole Bay Area in the west coast of Florida. So areas that Mullen recruited while he was at Florida, and they're both Power 4 credentialed players. Then SEC, where he spent most of his career. Elksness, tight end from South Carolina. Nick Elksness. JoJo Earl, wide receiver originally from Alabama. Ben Chrisman, offensive lineman from Kentucky. And Earl transferred to TCU after, but signed with Alabama. Vercaeus Gums, tight end from Arkansas. So really all of the guys that he's added either have SEC experience or from the state of Florida originally and Power 4 kids. Of course, now Terrence Welch, originally from LSU. So I think that's a theme you're seeing with Mullen's recruiting class from the portal, is that he's getting guys that are from areas he's familiar with, where he knows the caliber of athlete he's getting. And he's trying to increase the traits of this program, because you get the right traits in the building, he's going to be able to call plays. And as the program's profile increases, we've talked about it a million times on here, Pete, we are very bullish on the future of this program because we just have a lot of confidence in Mullen as a play caller. It's sort of a sleeping giant in terms of the location, and the quality of football in the Southwest has increased tremendously since I've been following. The best program in the country, from my view, is Bishop Gorman, which is right there close to campus. So, some of those guys are going to go to bigger schools, but you can get them on the transfer market. Plus you can get the guys that are just really good football players that maybe don't have the dimensions to go to those big schools from a Gorman. So this program is in a position to succeed. I think Mullen's trying to just fast track the body types in the room so he can call plays with SEC caliber athletes.
Man, we've added like 20 live viewers since we started talking about UNLV. So I don't know if it came from that, but if it did, man, then shout out to the Rebels and shout out to UNLV. Appreciate your guys' support.
Sergeant Mark is saying this kid acts like a future Raider. There's some different, Kane's Cat making a good point. A man willing to steal from his brothers, that's almost as bad as sexual assault. That's just a no-go. There's some lines in the sands that some coaches won't deal with. I think those are probably
Dillingham.
two big ones.
He kicked him off the team immediately, so that was obviously, something he wasn't going to put up with.
But. And also part of it too. And again, I'm not saying I don't know enough about it to say I haven't talked to the kid. I'm sure Mullen did much more research than we're doing on this show for the player. I hear the argument that it's too much, but I think with a guy that might be a one and done, you feel a little bit better that, as opposed to like a high school kid. But it's a risk, man. And these are sometimes the risk that you take here as a first-year player trying to get this program not off the ground, because they're coming off some very, very successful seasons, but to the level that you want it to be at.
Before we get to our last topic of the day, I wanted to get to this question from RJ Pettit. Says, I know it's tough to speculate, but what does the final wave of transfers from the remaining teams look like? Look, just off the top of my head, I expect programs like Ohio State and Texas to have a lot that goes out the door, because they're just recruiting so much every year that guys get recruited over. And some of these players that are maybe on the lower end of the depth chart, they still have that opportunity from their high school ranking, that they can go find a good opportunity for themselves elsewhere if they don't want to stick around there. Specifically, obviously, I think we're all looking at that quarterback room at Texas to see what happens there with Quinn Ewers. If he ends up leaving to the NFL, his stock isn't as high as it's been. But if they finish strong here and he's looked pretty good, then who knows if he just says, look, I'll take my chances here getting drafted somewhere and finding the right spot. If he does come back, does he leave? Does Arch stay? Does he leave? So we got a lot to figure out there. I think Ohio State, we got to see what happens with their quarterback room as well. They've already lost Aaron Noland. Julian Sayin, does he stay around? Is he going to be the guy? Are they going to make a move in the portal? So those two programs, to me, there's going to be a lot of dominoes that fall depending on what happens in those two situations. Notre Dame, I feel like they're building a pretty strong culture at Notre Dame with what they're doing. And a lot of those guys, I just don't – they will have portal movement, but I don't see as much potentially from Notre Dame. And then Penn State, I can't really say right now.
Yeah, I agree, especially at Notre Dame. I don't see a ton of movement there. They've added a lot, but I think they're adding with an eye towards next year. guys they're losing this year and they're replacing. I think you said it, Texas and Ohio State, because the level they recruit at, they just have so many highly paid, highly recruited, high ego. I don't want to say that negatively, but guys that, have been told they're great for a long time on the bench. You see Georgia, a team like Georgia has lost a ton in the portal, not necessarily impact guys right on their team right now, but guys that they've recruited. So it's a similar situation, I think, with Texas and Ohio State, because there's really 4 teams that recruit at that level consistently: Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas. So those teams have the most blue chip players accumulated. So some of those guys are going to leave if they feel they haven't had the opportunity they deserve.
So last topic here for the day, D, as we'll be wrapping things up. And then guys, if you want to catch us on Canes Insight, we'll be going live with Mike Ryan on Canes Insight after this show. But nice pickup here for UCF, as Jaden Nixon comes over at the running back spot. Had a great season for Western Michigan, started his career at Oklahoma State, and was a guy who was in the mix for Oklahoma State, but was never the featured back. Finally gets his opportunity at Western Michigan this past year, and his first team all-conference, 921 yards on 143 touches, 12 touchdowns. A guy who was a weapon in the passing game as well. A return man who has over 1,000 yards in his career. So Jaden Nixon is a really nice pickup here for Scott Frost, trying to establish the ground game once again for them.
Yeah, Scott Frost, we know what he likes at UCF. We saw him there. He wants a high-octane, high-pace offense with running backs that can make big plays, not just plotters, right? Guys that can make explosive scoreboard changing plays. You look at Jaden Nixon, this guy's an 11 flat 100-meter from Frisco, Texas, Dallas area, same area that produced an Evan Story. He went to high school with Ashton Jeanty too, right?
Yeah, they were high school teammates. Crazy.
So very talent-rich area there around Dallas. I watched this guy return a kick against Baylor. He's got speed, long speed that translates to the Power 4 level, to the Big 12 level. So he's not just like a Western Michigan guy. You mentioned, he originally was at Oklahoma State, has success there. So this is a Big 12 caliber player. Helps you as a return man as well. UCF with Gus Malzahn, different kind of running game than what Scott Frost brought to the table, but a very good running team, top 10 in yards per carry, top 10 in average. How are they going to move forward? Top 10 in overall average. When you look at this team going forward, the quarterback was such a hot potato this year. Dylan Rizek, a guy from South Florida, a guy I've been watching since he was early on in his high school career, a guy with a lot of production at the high school level from a young age. He had a nice freshman year. How's he going to fit into this offense? You want to help him have success. He needs to have guys he can hand off to that can make big plays. You lose RJ Harvey to the pros. I think a guy like this, who has been productive both as a returner and as a running back, who has legitimate top-end speed, who's familiar with the Big 12 and can make plays at that level. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're UCF, you've got to get a lot of guys like this, right? Because they're going to be running through plays. They're going to be running through guys. You got to have multiple explosive backs who are going to be able to make plays against tired defenses, against defenses that are confused and who are struggling to keep up with this UCF offense.
Appreciate everyone who's been on with us live today. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Coconut Grove Cane, man, appreciate the support. As always, we'll be going live here. Elgin Bridges, thank you for your being on the show with us. Brandon asking what time Canes Insight is. We'll be going live pretty much right after this. We gotta let Mike's here. We gotta let him in. We gotta let him in right now. But guys, thank you once again for being on here with us on Group Chat Football Live. We'll be back tomorrow. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.